Hi there. Today we're going to talk about what reserves are used for. This is Daryl Reeves, and I have over 20 years' experience working with nonprofits. I would say that most nonprofits tend to think about reserves, or they may not even think about reserves. You go about your year operating and you try to break even on your budget. Occasionally, you might get some reserves, either intentionally or unintentionally um, put into reserves, either by board directive or just out of making a profit year over year. So they build up. In my opinion, the board of directors and the president and CEO should be more intentional about thinking about what reserves should be used for and even have a policy as to what the plans are for those reserves. I see nonprofits that build reserves. It's just kind of there. They don't really think about it until a recession hits and they're like, oh, we have reserves. Let's use that to balance our budget. In my opinion, try not to use profits or reserves for general operational budget shortfalls. To have general operations budget at least break even year over year unless utilizing the reserves for an investment in a new program, but regular operations utilizing reserves shrinks the operations, and it's very risky if the reserves are used for ongoing operations rather than avoiding making those difficult decisions to stop the shortfalls. Now, I understand during a recession, you don't have a choice. Donations shrivel up, they shrink. I think that's fine to use reserves for those situations in a short term way. Long term eats away at those reserves and it creates more problems later rather than looking at the operations and right sizing that organization as soon as possible. I understand it's a difficult thing to do, but you have to do that or it becomes a bigger problem later. Investments in an organization can be actual investments, as in working with an investment company to invest in stocks, money markets, savings accounts, commercial paper, things like that. Investments can also be used in investing in assets such as real estate to grow programs for which the support of the mission of the organization that may or may not bring in a profit. Not all programmatic activities may bring in a profit. Many times programs lose money, but in the development of the nonprofit may bring in general donations, which support the entire organization and its mission. The reason that nonprofits must bring in excess revenue. Profits are used for program and overhead, future capital expenditures. I talk about the Uber model where, as an example, if you have a capital purchase, you don't want to expense it all in 1 year. So if you buy $100,000 item, you don't expense that on your income statement or your statement of revenues and expenditures. You want to make sure to spread that over depreciation over 5 years. That's just as an example. So your income statement doesn't show a $100,000 expense in 1 year, but $20,000 over a course of 5 years. You want to build those reserves over time, year over year over year. My opinion, 10% is a minimum, 15 is great, 20 is really thinking about the future. Investing in these returns for at least expected inflationary rates. So, in my opinion, if you don't have a budget that bakes in inflation, you're just trying to break even in today's dollars. You're not thinking about the inflation that may occur over the course of that year. So if you're just budgeting for the expenses kind of based on last year's number, you want to add at least 5 to 10% just to cover inflation for unforeseen increases in expenses in the next year, unless you're baking in it with the budget within the budget for a 10% increase for those items. That's kind of getting the same way, but in my opinion, you should also budget on top of inflation just to put into reserves. So you're building those reserves to cover future investments, actual investments, net assets are growing. You're able to invest in future programs and make investments in other types of things. If you don't, the cash sitting in reserves will be losing value if you don't at least cover the rate of inflation. Investment returns can be used for your operating budget, which may include program and or overhead, or pay for ongoing program when the revenues are suffering in down years, but not to be abused. Minor use for operational shortfalls, recessions, and such as I mentioned. But to ignore glaring operational shortfalls that may not be fixable should be addressed, and not to use reserves as a short term solution or a band aid. Kicking the can down the curb only creates greater operational shortfalls later. Layoffs, program elimination, and even closure may occur if it goes on too long. Also, you can use reserves for emergencies. Though insurance may pay for emergency damage, but perhaps items not covered by emergencies, reserves could be used for that as well. Well, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I will have more videos talking about some things within nonprofits that I hope you might find useful. Thank you.